All I'm going to say is that if you don't already know who Oren Klaff is, he's one of those guys you absolutely should know. The two books that he's written, both Pitch Anything and Flip the Script, are two of my favorite about the process of selling. More importantly, more specifically, about the process of attracting people so that selling becomes a lot less challenging, a lot less pushy, just not my style to do that. Allows you to be in a position where people are chasing you as opposed to you chasing them, which is absolutely essential, especially as you move up in rungs in terms of net worth. I'm going to keep this brief because I'm not feeling well today, but this conversation is awesome, and you guys are absolutely awesome because you put me in a position so that I can have an awesome conversation like someone like this who I have a ton of respect for. So much so that Oren Klaff even gave me a quote for my new book, Raising Capital for Real Estate, which is just about the coolest thing that's happened to me. So thank you guys for putting me in that position. I'm glad to provide this kind of content to you. I cannot thank you enough. You guys are absolutely awesome. Also, we have now added a tremendous amount to the schedule. The schedule is full now for Intelligent Investors Real Estate Conference for 2020. So if you haven't already got your ticket, go to intelligentinvestors2020.com. There are some absolute all-stars there. The CEO of Realty Mogul is going to be there. Neil Bawa is going to be there. Someone from CoStar, who spends millions of dollars every single year on only data, is going to be there. So like the industry leaders are going to be there, and people that you may not have heard of, but are behind the scenes really driving the ship in terms of where a lot of people get their information from. So check out intelligentinvestors2020.com. Grab your ticket. It's going to be in LA downtown. Absolutely awesome. My lovely wife, Chrissy, is producing the event, which means there's going to be some attention to detail. There's going to be some cute little things that everyone loves, and I'm really looking forward to it. If you know anyone that's been last year, they're going to give you a rave review because it was a really good time. Plus, the content was absolutely awesome. And if you know me, you know I take that very seriously. So head over to intelligentinvestors2020.com. Use ASYM as a discount code. You get $100 off. And I hope you enjoy this episode. How's it going, everyone? Our guest for today is Oren Klaff, who is the Director of Capital Markets at the investment bank Intersection Capital, where he manages its capital raising platform. Since 2005, Oren has grown the firm to approximately $2 billion in aggregate trade volume across a diversified portfolio of companies and transactions. And he's also the author of Pitch Anything and his new book, Flip the Script, which we're going to talk about in some detail today, and for good reason. Oren, thanks again for coming on.
Hey, I appreciate it.
So for the one listener that I have out there that hasn't already been familiarized with your work, especially Pitch Anything, which obviously set fire to the world of sales, let's talk just briefly about what your stance on selling is and why it's a little bit counterintuitive and a little kind of against some of the things that are also out there on the topic.
Yeah, I think there's a half dozen ways to approach that. But in my mind, the state of the art of sales, phase one, existed from 1950 to 2010. And that is the frame or the understanding or the positioning or the mindset or the approach that the investor has a prize to give us. And we're trying to win the prize of his money. So we chase him, we approach him, we sell to him, and through the process of trying to get the investor, we elevate him in status, in capability, and in power over us. And trying to sell from the low power, low status position to an investor, especially trying to sell an investment or trying to get capital, is the worst possible scenario. So when an investor is in the feels powerful, when he feels high status, when he has control and he feels like he's in control, it is very difficult to work with him. And the sales cycle or the investment cycle becomes very long, very difficult, and in many ways demeaning. But the approach to get an investor today puts most people, if not everyone, in the low status, low power position, which ultimately means high leverage, high negotiation, low pricing, long sales cycle, and all the bad stuff. So that's the way most sales is done today. So sales do get done, but they're sort of the worst possible sale that can be done.
Right. And one of the things you talk about in Pitch Anything is kind of that element of reframing that entire thing, pricing, understanding that you have the prize. You as a real estate operator, you as an issuer of a security have the prize. And one of the things that I mentioned to anyone that's kind of talking about closing the deal, to put things in perspective, look, if this is your first deal, sometimes you can feel like you're trying to scramble for every $25,000 or $50,000 or $100,000. And sometimes you can feel like all these other deals are out there competing against you. There is not an overwhelming glut of incredible real estate deals. The negative interest rate bond market value cap is about $15 trillion right now. So just looking at it from that perspective, you understand that's why people are coming after you, not the other way around. So definitely appreciate that. So let's talk about maybe, obviously, I'm sure that your life has definitely been impacted by the success of Pitch Anything. Let's talk about that first of all. And how has this transitioned into, writing this new book, Flip the Script?
Yeah, well, I think Pitch Anything, I didn't really understand the power of it when I released it. In fact, it's funny, my agent and my publisher called and they said, hey, why aren't you going to book signings? I'm like, you mean like driving to Kansas or Canada or Michigan and going to a Barnes & Noble and signing, 9 books for 3 little old ladies? They're like, yeah, everybody does book signings. William Shatner does book signings. And I said, William Shatner should have written a good book. And so it took a while, but Pitch Anything caught on, and it did. I no longer have to chase business. So the point is, like, we'll get somebody calling and they say, hey, there's someone who wants to do a fund with you, right? They'll put the capital in, you put your name on the fund and a referral. I won't even take that call if it's a referral. So in today's world, and this is interesting, I think topic for everybody, referrals aren't even good. Because it's so easy to find investors. It's so easy to get leads. It's so easy to have people to talk to. It's not having people to talk to. It's having them primed on you and your deal such that you're not having to teach them everything from dead scratch. So what Pitch Anything did for me, to answer your question, is people come in and they say, how do we work with you? Not tell me about yourself. So when calls come in and they say, hey, we got a good referral to you, but this guy we know says you do really good stuff. Tell me about yourself. I can't hang up on that quick enough, right? The old, hey, I'm just pulling underground into the garage. I might lose you. So that's how it changed my life. And I think everybody has to, you can call it a funnel. You can call it, pipeline management. You can call it content marketing. You can call it market awareness, whatever it is. But in today's world, you can't educate a buyer, an investor, on everything you're doing from dead scratch, on you, the market, the investment, the cap rate, the asset, the geography, the going out cap rate, the markets. So you'll spend a huge amount of time and energy educating somebody on that. And then they go, thanks. And then they'll start to look for competing offers. So Pitch Anything changed it for me, and everybody has to change for themselves, where people come in primed on what you can do. And then you can actually sell them and not educate.
Yes, you're speaking my language. I've been knee deep in this very thing, specifically as it relates to real estate, writing this book. And I'm sure that the listeners are probably laughing because it's saying it in a different way that I've been talking about so much, curating that list so that by the time you get on a phone call with them, they're just ready to move forward. They have a couple of nuances that they want to figure out that can make the business actually scalable. So
let me give you an example, right? So I help a lot of funds. This was a very difficult one. It's a movie fund. Right. So they were raising capital for some movies. They'd done a slate of movies. They'd had some success. I wrote the pitch deck and they raised a couple $1 million for their fund. They went off, operated successfully. They came back a couple years later and said, we want to do another raise. I go, okay, great. Right. They said, we're going to get our CFO on the line because now we've hired a CFO and we have a whole management team. I go, okay, great. The CFO comes on the line. She says, hey, I heard great things about you. I like the deck. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself? And I said, John can tell you about myself. Like, I've already helped you guys raise a couple $1 million. She goes, yeah, but that was before I got here. Why don't you start at the beginning? And so, and don't take this the wrong way. And I said, literally, Alice, like, fuck off. Like, okay, if you guys can't figure out how to spin up on your vendors that have succeeded for you, I don't have an hour to give you the whole story. Once you guys get your stuff together and call me back if you can get organized. And, they went away and obviously never came back. Probably because of the language. Some people don't mind the language, Hollywood, some people do. But that's the stance that you need to be in when somebody comes in and they're not primed on you. They're not ready to have a conversation and all those things. So that's a real world example of A, being busy, B, having pipeline, and C, having enough of a business and self-respect and enough of a program and enough marketing that when somebody says, yeah, I just got here, why don't you, spend an hour or whatever amount of time it takes to, spin me up on your business. I don't want to do any work, understanding who you are, what you do, what your capabilities are. You do all that work, right? So real world example.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, obviously everyone's stance on like how to handle a situation like that's different. However, the ability to produce that content, whether it's through reputation or through articles or through videos or something like that, your funnel needs to be designed in such a way that by the time that conversation can be had, you've already supplied them with the content. If they're not willing to do the work to figure out what this conversation is going to be about, then it's probably not worth your time. Now, I want to kind of get to some of the things you talk about and flip the script. Before you do that, though, I want to hear about what you just said, because this is something that I think a lot of people look. I'll be honest, let's say maybe 10 years ago, I fantasized about a time in which I could just talk to people that I didn't know about real estate.
Yeah.
Right? I saw my empty calendar and I was just like, oh my gosh, it would be a complete fantasy of mine if I could just have calls scheduled back to back and just be like, hey, this is Hunter. This is what I do. Like, before we even getting into kind of that stance, how Pitch Anything helped, but like, what does that funnel look like for you? How does that marketing effort drive people to that stance where you say, oh, you don't know about me already? F off.
Yeah. Yeah. So is the question around what content works, or what's the experience like of having a completely jam-packed calendar?
Yeah. What systems and processes have you put in place that have allowed you to be in that position where your calendar is jam-packed? And if someone comes to a meeting that's unprepared, as if they haven't gone through that funnel of content or processes or had those conversations with other people on your team, what are the ones that are most effective and got you to that position?
I got one word for you that I think would be effective for people listening to this: insight. If you cannot provide insight to someone on their own business, right, in something that's meaningful, then your content is cliche. It will feel cliche, and it feels like you could get it just about anywhere. So let's see. By the way, Hunter, do you play any sports, or are you in any kind of?
I do like CrossFit, stuff like that.
Okay, great. I'm in CrossFit.
Cool.
And I do quite a little bit of running. And running and CrossFit do not like to live together.
That's right.
And basically, at the intersection of not wanting to live together is your knee, right? And so running and CrossFit sort of creates knee pain. So I'm on YouTube and I'm looking for calf and knee stretches and how to reduce knee pain. And I get some great solutions, right? And I follow it and it works and everything. I cannot remember the name of the guys who showed me the content for how to fix my knee, right? That's bad. So they had the insight, but I went to a bunch of different YouTube and they all sort of repeated the same thing and nothing really stood out. So nothing was really insightful. So your content cannot be cliche. Hey, this is the interest rate. These are cap rates. These are what kind of deals are trending, right? You need to dig deep and go, what would somebody find meaningful? So it's got to be better than a newspaper article. Because if you think about, I subscribe to the New York Times and, read, Washington Post and consume quite a lot of content. And it's great what you get out of the New York Times. But I can't remember that, unless it's Friedman or someone or Malcolm Gladwell. I can't remember the name of the author, right? Just consume it because they don't have a strong perspective. They're reporting news. A meteor landed. They went and looked at the meteor and they're reporting what kind of smoke and chemicals are coming off the meteor. That's it, right? They're reporting. You need to provide a lens on the world that creates insight that's meaningful. That will be the basis for your content funnel, right? Or you're something, hyper specific like peak oil, right? But if you're a bit of a generalist like commercial real estate, you need to have a lens and a perspective and consistently provide people insight on a way to look at it. That will build you a beautiful funnel that people will want to come and work with you.
Yes, I really, really like that. I mean, one of the ways that I kind of think about what you just said is, what would your ideal audience feel proud to share with their friends?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's where you create content that's actually has the potential to go viral, right? Where someone says, wow, look at this article that Oren wrote. It's so counterintuitive. It's so interesting. It's so not what you would anticipate when you start to read the article, that when I share this, my friends are going to actually think I'm smart that I found this. That's where it's actually worth your time.
Absolutely. And the technical name that I've given that is narrative transport. If your story is interesting enough, if your content, if your insight, if your point of view is interesting enough, the story will transport itself without you having to be there. So people will refer it, it'll go viral, they'll forward it, they'll tell other people about it, right? And so much so that, when I have technical people, or we just hired a CEO and a COO for my organization, they said, hey, can I see your CRM? I go, well, I don't have a CRM, it's just the front page of Google, right? They're like, well, how do you track all your deals? I go, no, whatever's on the front page of Google, I do that deal, right? In my Gmail, my first, and they're like, but what happens if something comes in, you don't read it, and it goes below the first page of Gmail? I go, I guess I don't do it, right? And so, and now they're putting in a CRM and trying to track stuff, and my partners get mad because, deals that we can make millions of dollars on just come onto my Gmail and then disappear because we're so busy. And that's a result of having insight and content that people want to forward around and talk about and feel like this guy's an expert. And that probably leads us into flip the script. It's how to show people that you're an expert. And by expert, what does that mean, right? It means that somebody truly believes that you've solved their problem or done the kind of deal that they're interested in over and over and over and over and over again. And it is a very simple push-up for you to solve the problem or do that kind of deal. So that's when you can show someone that you're an expert in the kind of thing that they do, it becomes much easier to do a deal with them. Because you become a peer, right? Or a leader and not somebody who's chasing them to do a deal. Experts don't chase people to do deals. Experts have people come to them wanting to do deals.
That's right. You have to reverse the flow of your entire mentality. It's not about going around chasing people around, converting them to invest in your deal. It's about having them flock towards you, and you get to select the ones that are the best fit for you.
Well, really, Hunter, I've just to weigh in on that. If you talk to someone and you successfully convey that you're an expert, that you're an expert, you have a track record, that you're credible, that you know what you're doing, that you're, trustworthy, and allow them to do some diligence on you, and you offer them a deal that's a fit for their portfolio or for their investment criteria, and they don't respond, it's not a lead at that moment, right? And you can move on with poise and grace and comfort, and you don't need to keep chasing them, right? You offer them the best thing possible for them from the expert position, and they don't bite. You're trying to feed steak to a vegetarian.
Let me ask you this. The world is full of, quote, experts. And especially in the world of commercial real estate, this is a highly competitive, highly lucrative business that attracts the best of the best consistently. So how do you establish that true expertise? How do you build that trust? How do you establish that credibility? Like, what are some of the tips or hacks that you've been able to do? And maybe there aren't hacks. Maybe you have to put in the hours to really establish that expertise. Yeah. How do you convey that expertise to a potential investor?
I think one of the best ones that I've come up with over time, and so other investment, I train other investment banks, and some much larger than us, other advisory firms on how to pitch. And so the one thing that they really love is conveying this sense of we're an expert, the way that I show them how to do it. And you read and flip the script. I developed something called a flash roll, right, or a drum solo. So that call will kind of go like this. They'll ask, another bank will ask me to help originate or win a deal. And so the CEO or CFO of that company will come on and we'll say, hey, tell us a little bit about your company. And they'll say, well, we've been growing really fast. And, we started 5 years ago. Looks like we're going to do well over 80 million this year. And if we can continue to raise a little bit of capital, we should be able to grow, faster. And our competitors aren't really coming up with it. And so I'll let them carry on like this for a minute or two. And then I'll just say, stop. What are you doing? You're on the phone right now with 4 or 5 people who can introduce you to $3 billion of capital in a couple phone calls. But all we're hearing is $80 million, grow fast. Who told you to say that? This is terrible. No, seriously, give me their number. I'll call them and tell them never to talk to you again. Why aren't you telling me, hey, 2 years ago, we were at $40 million in revenue. We set our goals to be at 80 million. We invested $3.5 million per quarter in marketing. We're able to decrease our cost of customer acquisition by 10%, which really put us in a 10, 15% margin scenario. Using that, our own capital to continue growth quarter over quarter, we've been growing $10 million of revenue and continue to add margin. As we crest through $80 million of revenue, we've got clear visibility in Q3 next year of achieving $120 million of revenue, and then we'll be able to acquire our next top 2 competitors. Now I understand the business. And they go, oh, yeah. How did say that again, right? And so when you can communicate real estate or a business clearly, succinctly, in a way that investors want to buy it, sort of give them the information that they need in the order that they need it, in the amount of detail that they can consume, it frames you up as somebody who does this all the time. And so I might, if I break this down into something really simple, that's a good example. But so Hunter, what kind of car do you drive?
Infiniti Q50.
Oh, that's a great car. Okay. And it's a couple years old. What era is it from?
2015. It's a 4-door, black.
Great. Okay. So you've got the Infiniti. That's a great car, but you're on a trip and you hear some noises coming from it and sort of like some crunching and a little bit of a fluid leak. So you take it to a garage and the guy comes out and he goes, yeah, definitely doesn't sound good. And there's some fluids. Tell you what, it's $350. Leave it here. We'll take a look at it. We'll tell you what we think the problem is. And if you get it fixed here, we'll credit the $350 to the repair. Right. And you go, I don't know. Right. Because you don't have this tremendous sense of certainty that the outcome that you want is going to happen. You're getting into a situation, but it's not clear what's going to happen in the future. So you drive down the road to another garage. A guy comes out. He's wearing a blue overalls with a name tag on it, Eric, whatever. And he takes a look at it and he says, hey, get in there and rev it up a bit. And you rev it up. And sure enough, the fan belt goes, squeak. And there's some crunchy noise and some fluid comes out. And he says, listen, let me tell you what's going on here. When they had the tsunami and the hurricanes, in Japan, they had to move the Infiniti factory over to another factory where they don't usually build these. They did a good job, but they actually built it over at the Mazda factory, which they leased for 3 months. And the fan belt, they used a 23705, which is not the correct fan belt for this engine. And that caused this wobble, between the belts. And then you started to get these bearings started to wear down. So the 2307C fan belt and the 1505 bearings were the wrong ones. We keep those in stock. We've done at least 7 of these every month for the last 2 years. This I can fix. It's $500. Come back tomorrow morning and pick it up if you leave it here now. That kind of detail and specificity around problem solving gives investors and buyers of all kinds a feeling of certainty that the asset class, the problems involved with it, you understand the financial mechanisms underneath it. By saying it a little bit faster than you could if you were making it up, going into the details and specifics, coming back out of the specifics and making a broad, clear claim about what will happen in the future, you really provide a sense to investors that you really are an expert in this domain. The problem is most people, when they talk about an asset, if they do go to the details, they can never come back out and put them in context, or they don't go into the details beyond just a cliche, going in cap rate, going out cap rate, IRR and that kind of thing. So that is one way or a hack to really give people an immense amount of comfort that you're an expert in that particular kind of asset.
Yeah, let me circle back because you said a couple of things I actually took notes on. So especially about going into the details. So look, in the world of institutional capital, which I believe is the world that you typically play in, there's not as big of a variance in terms of who you're courting in terms of your investors. In the world of syndicated passive investors, you can have a pretty significant variance in terms of who you're talking to. You can have someone that's considering making their first investment in commercial real estate. You can have someone that's invested in 30 syndications and is now trying to get their 31st. So in those initial stages of the conversation, it's really important to learn about their background and then make an assumption about the type of language that you should use during the conversation. You should certainly include details, and it's okay to include details that they may not even understand.
It's just important that the time at which you go into the void at which they don't understand is brief, and then come back with that big picture. This is the thesis. That's the data to back it up. If you want more information about that, I can send you that. But big picture, here's what we're trying to accomplish. One other thing that I really like there is that the main concern that everyone is thinking when they're going into an investment is, does this person know what they're doing? The easiest way to overcome that is, have they done it before? The easiest way to establish that you've done it before is create a system because you had to, because you did it so many times, and then share that system with them. So like, you're systematizing everything, and the implication is, we had to do this because we were wasting time otherwise, and now we've done it so many times. Here's our system, and now we're going to go through it. What do you think about that?
I think that's right. So the way I would summarize it, if somebody believes that you know what you're doing, there's no way to go through with a syndicated passive investor and really go through, it'd be like taking them through the full appraisal, through all the underwriting, through all the mechanics of the deal. There just isn't enough time, and they don't have enough attention, and they don't care enough to do all that, right? So they don't want to know the details. Number one, they want to know that you know the details.
Yes.
So how can you communicate to them that you know it? And the flash roll, which I lay out in Flip the Script, is one very effective way of letting people know that you know. This, I learned this in venture investing, right? So venture capital investors or seed investors or angel investors or even private equity groups would say, hey, tell us about the competition, right? Who do you compete with? Tell us about the competition. It is not possible in a 20, 30-minute pitch meeting to get into, if you're a software company, the 15, 20 companies, including Microsoft and Oracle and Google and Facebook and Yahoo, that can and do compete with you. It's impossible. That's a 2-3 hour meeting. They don't actually want to know the complete breakdown of competition. They want to know that you know that there aren't two kids in their mom's basement in Sweden. They're going to pop up, with the same software you have and compete with you. Right. So they want to know that you're part of the industry and that they don't actually want the details of Google and Microsoft and Oracle and the 17 other little startups. They want to know that you're so integrated in the industry that you know everybody, and that nothing moves on the industry without you knowing about it 6 months ahead of time, and that everybody in the industry collaborates and competes at the same time. They want to know that you're part of all that. They don't actually want the breakdown of the competition. So in the same way, investors don't want all the details. So what you're communicating to them is not for comprehension. When they're saying, give me the details, tell me about the underwriting, how does it work? What are the key assumptions? You're not educating them for comprehension. You're educating them on the basis that there's no detail in this project too small that you don't know it, and how if that detail changes, how it affects the model and the outcome, right? So that's one. Number two is the most effective executive pitch guys that I've seen are able to go into the details quickly, in a short period of time, 60 seconds, 120 seconds, 180 seconds, 3 minutes, come back out and then talk about the broad picture. What I see, the biggest challenge, the biggest problem I see with people going to syndicate to retail investors or passive investors, whatever you want to call them, is the inability to move between those two modes. They go into the details and they get stuck there. Or they just talk in broad generalities. It's a good market. The cap rate is good. It's a 20% IRR. Broad generalities without being able to get into the specifics. And third, what you said is, if you can convince someone that you have a underwriting model and they like the way you underwrite, and if you can then convince someone that the assumptions that you're making are reasonable assumptions, then you don't have to argue with them about the actual investment. You don't have to debate the quality of the investment that you're offering. They like your underwriting, basically they like your mindset, your systems, the way you approach real estate, and they feel the assumptions are reasonable, then they'll like your deal.
Let me ask you something. You launched Flip the Script. I saw it launch on Amazon even during the pre-sale. Reached out to your team. I said, yes, we've got to have my boy back on here, talk about this new book. And someone from your team sent me a copy of the book. And I just flipped through the pages really quickly and saw something and had a sheer panic, which I'll share with everyone in just a moment. It has to do with inception.
Yeah.
Why and how? Why is it important to do this? And how do you go about this idea of putting your own ideas in someone else's head in a manner that makes them feel like they came up with it on their own.
Yeah. I think the way to get into that is what I started noticing right before I started writing up this idea of how to execute inception. A typical sale here at, or a contract or transaction here in my company, guy will come in, we'll pitch him, he'll leave 45 minutes later, and we'll sit around in the conference room going, hey, Oren, this is what I think you did well. This is what could be improved on. Basically a debrief post pitch, right? And after a few minutes, we'll hear the door open back up and the guy will come back in. That's never good, right? Usually means somebody went to their car and opened their glove box and got a gun out. Right? But they come back in and the guy says, hey, listen, here's a check, right? And writes out a check for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000. Yeah, I know it's all going to be worked out, but let's get started on Monday. This should get us started. And then he'll leave and just leave the check on the conference room table. So if this had happened once, right, I'll say, that's an anomaly. But this is how our deals go over. And I can give 50 examples of something like that happening. We had a guy here in the office a couple of weeks ago, and we met he came on the weekend because he was in town. We pitched him, about 45 minutes later left. We walked him out. We're going to go grab some coffee and then everybody gone for the weekend. I said, John, what are the next steps to really getting this wrapped up? That's my best close. He goes, I signed the contract. I left it on the conference room table, right? We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. So what I started noticing is deals just started closing themselves without any closing process, without any ask. And what was happening is I was putting the ideas to create the close, to create the desire, to create the wanting, to create the move forward process in their mind without me doing anything. They closed the deal on their own. So that's the process of inception. I really think that's how sales are done today. People want to buy. They don't want to be sold. If they see you selling, if they feel you selling like it was done in the 1950s, they can see the process. They know the process. They feel like they're in a process, right? And so keeping the process invisible to people creates inception. It's putting your ideas in their head in such a way that they are able to organize it and just say, how do we get started?
Interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. So the reason I had that panic, by the way, is because I actually talk about something similar in my own book, but it's thankfully not related to selling. It's equally powerful when it comes to understanding educational content, getting the best out of educational content. I have found that most of the best ideas I get from listening to podcasts and reading books are not actually the content that's written in front of me, but from the ideas that I infer from reviewing it upon contemplation. And so I basically make a pitch to people that are reading the book, just say, look, pay attention to this and then contemplate what I'm saying. It's the same concept though, because when I say, oh my gosh, whenever there's a really popular book out there, I'll use 10X as an example from Grant Cardone. If you ask someone what the point of that book was, you're going to get 10 different answers if you ask different people because their own perspective of the book is what makes it compelling to them. So just wanted to mention that. I think it was an interesting crossover, especially I was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to rewrite this whole section. So we think about the game specifically. I also want to talk about pessimism, which is something you circle on there. This is another important part of the book. And again, very counterintuitive, especially as it relates to those 1950s strategies you were mentioning earlier. Why is this an important part of your sales strategy or closing strategy?
Yeah, I think there's this general sense of sales. You mentioned Cardone. That stuff is quite exhausted. If you try and do those Cardone things in a real sales situation with an experienced buyer, it will disintegrate very quickly because it's all based on getting someone to say yes, right? Get people in these yes patterns, get them, trap them, corner them into saying yes, and then sort of say, but didn't you say that you wanted an investment that could do 8%?
That's exactly right.
Right. And this is what I'm offering you. So don't you agree this would be the best investment for you, as you consider what to do today? And you already told me that you thought this was an area that you'd be interested. You like the geography, you like this asset class. So wouldn't it be the best thing to do just to move forward? Does that make sense to you, Mr. Jones? So the problem with getting people to say yes and pushing them into this always thinking positive is people know that there's two sides to a pancake, no matter how thin. They need to experience the other side, the pessimism, in order to feel like they can go forward with confidence, right? There's many ways to do this in real estate. I like to frame things up as bookends. Here's the downside case. If everything that can go wrong does go wrong, right? We're off a little bit on our assumptions. The market softened. The occupancy, is reduced. In general, this geography doesn't perform as well as expected. These markets constrain a little bit. Here's the downside protection that we have in the deal. Now, if I can, right, and walk them through the pessimistic scenario so they feel like they're seeing both sides of the story. Everybody knows there's two sides to a story. If you're only framing up the positive upside, the big picture, the best case, they feel like they're being sold, right? They're not being told a story about a future that you write. So your job is to tell a story about a future, a financial future for the asset that is very likely to happen. If they're only seeing the big upside IRR case and not seeing the ROI and not seeing the downside and not seeing some downside protection, that you haven't taken them through the pessimism journey. You've only shown them optimism. And people know in the back of their mind, naturally, organically, historically, through experience, and we're programmed that if they haven't seen what can go wrong, they haven't seen the whole story. So I always make sure to take someone through pessimism or what can go wrong or the downside case before I take them through the optimistic case. And that way they feel comfortable and it's easier to get them to a sense of certainty. And now they can push the deal forward on their own because they've seen both sides of the story. This is why you have to close. This is why you have to push the deal. This is why you have to do all the work when you're only showing them the optimistic case, is because they can't do it on their own because they haven't experienced pessimism and they cannot move forward on their own in the inception model unless they've seen both sides.
Yeah, I really like that. I think the easiest way to do that, at least graphically, sharing a sensitivity analysis where there's a pretty significant cap rate expansion during the hold period. Man, it's even powerful, like from a emotional component for very sophisticated investors. I'd like to include myself in that conversation. If I can see that if we have a 15 basis point cap rate expansion annually and I'm still able to get an 8% IRR, that's a pretty bad situation to be in, especially over like an 8 or 10 year hold period. Man, I'll take that all day. If that's reality, I would take a 9% all day in that situation. Something else about that during those conversations, you frequently hear people who don't work with anyone unless they've been through a recession, stuff like that. It's the same kind of deal. If you can share with an investor a truthfully, emotionally challenging situation that you've been through in business and how you overcame that challenge, it's another way to build rapport quickly because they realize that you have the tools in place to do that. Because similar to what Oren's saying, if all you're saying is, oh, yes, this is amazing, everything's good, what's the first thing they're going to think? Okay, when did you found the company? Oh, what did you found it after the Great Recession? Okay, clearly you're just a benefactor of market dynamics, etc. They assume the worst if you don't paint the picture for them. So talk about the issues you've faced and how you overcame them and the lens at which you view challenging situations.
Yeah. So the way I do this is I say, hey, look, 2 9-year-olds in Ukraine can run a hockey stick pro forma, right? You put in it's just math. You just put in the good assumptions, you drag the model out 36 months and wow, right? You've got, $3 million of upside, which translates to a 12% ROI and 20% IRR using these, current exit cap assumptions, right? So the investor knows success takes care of itself, right? And by the way, these hockey stick models, almost, out of 1,000, almost none of them ever hit, all right? So the way I would do it, I'd say, hey, look, if I have to think about sort of pitching a last real estate deal, so I'd say, look, we've run a couple scenarios, right? I think the most important scenario to look at is the downside case. This is about, the world melting down, right? And while we haven't been through the 2008, 2009 period, we have lots of people on the team and we work with a lot of people who have, and we modeled what that would look like here. What does a workout scenario look like? Then here's the base case. This is what we think, average people working at an average pace in an average deal in an average economy, pretty plain vanilla stuff here, nothing exciting. This is the base case. And then, hey, Hunter, would it be okay if I show you the upside case, right? This is the one that we're going to work really hard to try and hit. And this is what we're excited about, optimistic about. This is what gets us out of bed in the morning to go hit the upside case. Okay, if I show you the upside case, right?
Yeah, count me in.
permission for someone to say, yeah, let me see the big one, right? That puts some intrigue around it. That puts a story around it. That makes it exciting. And you're not the one pushing the upside case. They're the one asking to see it.
I like that a lot. And, looking at downside protection, this is something I mentioned so many times recently, looking at whatever metrics are particularly compelling from a downside protection standpoint should be shared and led with, because they can do the math internally. Break-even occupancy is a great example of this. We have a property that's 94% occupied, break-even occupancy below 70% in a market that's 92% occupied. That is a landslide, especially late in the cycle. I really like that. All right, Oren, I am late in the stage of finishing this book I've been working on for months. Yeah. I want to hear from you, from a technical standpoint, how is this book different than the one you wrote a few years ago? And talk about your writing process and actually how, you pushed this through while being so busy.
Yeah. So it's interesting because I have a new publisher for Flip the Script, and they're very a portfolio, and they have a framework, and they gave me the framework, right? And I spent a couple months trying to write their framework because it's a big dollar book, right? There's just a lot of money involved getting it out. And so they want to try and have real processes around publishing it. But I couldn't write the framework because if you really have content and you really have insight and you really have something inside you that's trying to get out so you can tell people about it, it typically doesn't want to fit into a cookie cutter. And so writing the book was really, I wrote it 3 times, and maybe you'll find this, right? I wrote it once and it was good. And right before I sent it off to the publisher, and I was probably a month ahead of the deadline, I took a look at it and I go, this is a good book, but it's not Pitch Anything. It's not Pitch Anything 2. It's not the sequel. So then I sat down and I said, okay, how do I really make it something that I believe in, a book that I would want to read? And that was really the gateway that I went through. Not, is it a good book, but is this something that I would sit down with and go, wow, this is amazing. So then essentially I rewrote it, right? And I came up just past the deadline. They gave me an extension. I was about to hit send, and I read it again. And I go, I really like this book. The concepts are good. Am I completely signed off? I mean, do I love the way that I've told these stories? Am I in love with it? I said, hey, I need another 60 days. And then finally the 3rd version was out, and I knew in my mind and in my heart and my bones that this was really my legacy. So that's really another legacy book. And then in fact turned out to be true. Like, the people who love this book are amazing people that I respect. So that's the lens that I think you got to look through. Phase 1 is it a good book? Okay. Phase 2, is this something that I feel deeply in my bones is something that I would love? And then the 3rd phase, if you can get to it, is this part of my legacy? Is this what, when I'm gone, will be left behind and people will still be reading, talk about, be interested in? And I think that's a difference between, people putting out a book, a white paper, a business card, something to just put up on Amazon and say you have a book, and something that will stand the test of time.
Yeah, I agree. And, I did have that feeling at one point where I had written the book, I thought it was good, and I had this sneaking suspicion. So one of the reasons I do a podcast is because I learn auditorily, but I hadn't done a live reading of the book. Now, this is not necessary for everyone, but for me, I knew in the back of my mind I had to do a live reading, not the audiobook, just me sitting down, recording myself and listening to it back.
That's great.
And just thinking, oh my gosh, I don't want to spend 48 hours straight reading my own book. And I did it and made significant changes to the book. And now I'm like 100% confident. But man, that creeping feeling that you probably felt where you're like, do I actually have 2 more months to dedicate to this? Not a good feeling as a successful entrepreneur, but man, once it's done and you let it rip, that's a great feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. Last thing, when I called the publisher and I said, hey, I need another 2 months, right? And they were aggravated, to say the least. There's a whole schedule and you're releasing against other books and movies and times and holidays and everything like that. And I said, guys, it's done when it's done, right? A book is different. It's not a construction project. It's content and it's you, right? And this is where I would just wrap up, Hunter. I would say, by the work, one knows the workman. And that book is your imprint for your family, for your friends, for generations of people. You can't take it back. They will know you by the work you've done.
Super, super powerful and super timely. Oren, I really appreciate you coming on, man. I'm real excited to go through the rest of the book and everything. I'm sure a lot of listeners will be as well. And I especially like the fact that you have a freaking background in real estate and speak the language, and also were able to cater this to a lot of, accredited investors, despite a lot of your background being with the institution. So, dude, thank you so much. Anything that listeners need to know about, learning more about how to buy your books, reaching out to you, finding you on social media, what links do you want us to link to?
Yeah, I think that's great. Really, a great place to start is pitchanything.com. Put your name in there and you'll get very useful information. We have a newsletter that is exactly what I said. It comes out, it's insightful, it's usable, there's no promotion in it. And we really try and take care of our, the million people who have read Pitch Anything and signed up to receive more information on it. So that's a great place to start. And then just head over to Amazon and buy Flip the Script. That thing, well, I train companies on that, and they'll come back 2 weeks later and they say, our best reps, which we didn't have any expectations for getting any better, double the revenue. And I love that because they want to improve the young guys. But when the experts improve their sales, then you have something. So Flip the Script will do you well if you're a beginner or you're an expert.
Love it. We'll link to those in the show notes page. Oren, thanks again, buddy.
Thanks, Hunter. I appreciate it. Really, really great questions.
All right, listeners, thanks for checking out the episode. As always, the contact information for our guest will be available in the show notes page, which is hosted on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher. Don't forget, if you want access to some of the free goodies that I'm talking about at the beginning of these episodes, like free ebooks, weekly investor emails, and articles about some of the most important investment-related topics, make sure that you have created an account with CFC because this stuff is automatically available. You can do this by going to cashflowconnections.com and signing up as an accredited investor. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at hunterthompson@cashflowconnections.com. Thanks again.